Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hi, friends. What is wrong with Christian nationalism? And why all of a sudden is patriotism a bad thing? We're going to talk about that today with author Jeff Kinley. Before we get to Jeff and bring him in, we want to thank you guys for sending in your donations. Twice a year, we come to you and say, hey, we're doing this for 6 months. Not for 6 months. We're trying to raise money for the next 6 months of podcasts, and you've been keeping us going. We're so thankful. So the website is worldviewmatters.TV. More on that in just a little bit once we get going. But great book out called God's Grand Finale, Wrath, Grace, and Glory in Earth's Last Days. That's from author Jeff Kinley. And we're blessed to have him on. You can go to the website, thekingiscoming.com. Or, of course, jeffkinley.com. You can get info on the Vintage Truth podcast, Prophecy Pros podcast with Todd Hampson, and the King is Coming TV program. You can actually watch that on the Real Life Network as well. Brother, so much to talk about. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Good to see you.
Of course, Dave. It's always great to be with you, brother.
Yeah. Well, what have you been doing lately? You've been preaching at conferences, writing some more. I mean, you're keeping up with your podcasts. That question one is, what have you been doing and how do you keep up with everything?
Yeah. A lot's been going on. It's been a hugely packed schedule for me. Lots of travel, a lot of airports and conferences, and California. Just got back from Iowa, got back from Canada. Brazil was last month, and just a few more dates left in the year, and we're going to take it easy for a while. So yeah, just speaking at a lot of conferences, and it's all on Bible prophecy. So the hunger is out there for sure.
You know, is the hunger growing, do you think? Because I know that, what is it? The huge percentage of churches don't touch on it, ignore, avoid, whatever you want to call it, Bible prophecy. Do you see that shifting a little bit? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I really do, David. I see a remnant church rising up. And wherever we go and wherever I go, I'm seeing places start to really pack out. And there are people that are actually putting on conferences by themselves without the support of their pastor, without the support of an organization. They said, look, I'm going to raise some funds. I'm going to get a committee together, and we're going to do a prophecy conference. And we've seen those in the hundreds of people coming to these things. So yeah, I think there really is a great hunger and a real remnant that's rising up and beginning to see how relevant Bible prophecy is for where we are today.
That's funny. They've got to bypass the pastor to put on a biblical conference. Oh my goodness, yeah. That's the state of America, isn't it?
It really is. I used to joke. I was on staff at a church one time, and it got so bad. I said, I'm going to have to leave the church so I can go back into ministry again, kind of thing. So,
and obviously, that's funny and sad at the same time.
But yeah. It is. It's kind of a happy, sad thing. But yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay, so. One of the things that you suggested we address today, and I'm thankful for that, and Christian nationalism would be it. We haven't talked in depth about that on this podcast. However, I did have Jack Hibbs on, and it was after he had opened Congress with that offensive prayer. And I just want to go back to that. I think I have a couple of the things he told me were about 2/3 of his controversial prayer was actually based on historical phrases coming from those who founded the country. And Jack Hibbs said, I just borrowed from our history, and today people couldn't take that. For example, his prayer was based on Reverend John Witherspoon, who actually served in Continental Congress. He was the president of Princeton, who was the founding father who educated so many others about a biblical perspective on government. So Jeff, start right there. Yeah. And see, first of all, the observation is, wow, things have changed since the days of Witherspoon and the founding fathers, haven't they?
They really have. And what most people today will purposefully neglect is the fact that our country was founded upon Judeo-Christian principles. And the Bible was an intricate part of what informed the framers of the Constitution. You had virtually almost all men that I can recall were at least believers in God. Now, they may not be practicing Christians that signed the Declaration of Independence, but God was just a part of daily life. I mean, Benjamin Franklin used to say during the Great Awakening that you could hardly walk down a street in America and not hear hymn singing coming from homes. And he himself was a supporter of Edwards' ministry. But there's so many people that today that will deny it. You talk about denying history. They go back and try to rewrite history and then deny the way that Christianity once informed our great country. And so, well, for someone like Jack to then at least even allude to some of the things that our early framers said, they find that very, very offensive because they're trying to fundamentally reconstruct and reset and reimagine our country.
And unfortunately, Jeff Kinley, they've been somewhat successful doing that, editing or changing our history, the public school textbooks, the history books. And unfortunately, we now have a generation that have grown up not learning perhaps what you and I did when we were going through school and before that on true American history. And I just pulled up, for example, the first prayer of the Continental Congress from 1774. And in that prayer earlier this year in Congress, Jack Hibbs also borrowed from Jacob Duché, who was a pastor who opened that prayer, and he used the F word, Father. Father.
How dare.
Yeah, and he used the J word, Jesus. And these things are offensive now. But friends, it'll take time to go through all that, and I don't want to with Jeff. I want to hear your commentary. But I want to encourage people to you can go to chaplain.house.gov and look up the first prayer of the Continental Congress by Reverend Jacob Duché and read that from 1774. And then I think a lot of people would look at that and go, wow. So why is a few phrases so offensive now? Go ahead and share whatever you'd like about that, Jeff.
Yeah, so basically what we've done is we have voted God off the island in our national conversation. We just said, no, you're not a part of us anymore. We don't want him in the marketplace. We don't want him in government. We don't want him in the schools, universities. We don't want him online. Everywhere that God is mentioned, there will be an attack against that. And I think there's a greater narrative that's going on here, David, is that Satan is ramping up to the last days. He's ramping up to a global government, ramping up to an anti-God narrative. And so he is he's the prince of the power of the air, Ephesians 2 says. And so he's the one, I believe, that's driving this narrative. And the other thing that he does that he's really a master at, and that his minions, his followers, do very well, is they take Christian principles and they'll hijack those things and then redefine them for their own purposes. I mean, words like democracy, saying things like that. If you're a patriot, you're a threat to democracy. If you believe in righteousness, then you're now a hater. Now they've redefined tolerance. They've redefined love. They've redefined diversity. These are all in unity. All these things are good values, but when applied to negative and unbiblical principles, then all of a sudden they mean just the opposite of what they originally meant. And that reminds me of Isaiah 5:20 that says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. So Satan's changed the price tags, he's changing the definitions, and he's changing the minds of really the majority of people in secular society.
Yeah. True. Jeff, let's go back now. We started talking about Christian nationalism and why this is almost used as a derogatory term or looked at in a way, not by everybody, but by enough people that would attack us. But don't we have to go back to what nationalism is and define that, which is basically loyalty and not even pride maybe of your country, but loyalty to your country or your system of government, to a nation, especially one like ours with the freedoms that we have. What's wrong with that? So go ahead and share a little bit about nationalism maybe and how that now Christian nationalism, because they're looking at that as a poor thing, negative thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you go to any other country in the world, you go to if Italy celebrates Italy, if people are proud of being Swiss or of being German or what, all of a sudden it's wrong to be a fan of your country now. And basically, again, what the left is doing, what the liberal left is doing, is, again, they're redefining things. They're trying to find points of commonality between our incoming administration and with Nazism. So they will say things like, well, all you people that are anti-abortion, now think about how radical this is. You're anti-abortion only because you want babies to be created for the state.
Oh my goodness.
So that the state can then exercise more and more tyranny. You want to salute the flag, just like Hitler had people saluting him. And so they'll take all these things and completely turn them inside out. The idea to me, David, of Christian nationalism is just what you said. It's being a good patriot. We grew up saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag. And what did the flag represent? It represented freedom. It represented independence. It represented being able to pursue the happiness, in your life. But today, they say that represents tyranny. But the mere fact that they say it represents tyranny, they're trying to force that on people, is in itself tyrannical. And so for me, someone asked me not long ago, what do you think about Christian nationalism? I said, well, it really begins with how you define that term. Yep. If you're coming at it by saying Christian nationalism is a sort of a dominion theology, if you will, of Christians wanting to take over the country by any means necessary, even military force, then I'm obviously against that. If you mean Christian nationalism is just someone who is a Christian, but who is also a patriot of their country and wants to see righteous values enacted, then Christian nationalism, is a good thing. And what I also find very offensive right now is that there are some camps within the Christian world right now that are really kind of decrying the fact that Christians were very involved in the election and that they're actually happy about the election. And my response to that, Dave, has just simply been, look, all we're really saying is if there's a candidate that wants to destroy babies and one that doesn't, if there's a candidate that wants to mutilate young kids, their genitalia, and then one is against that, one that wants men to go into women's bathrooms, one that doesn't, one that wants to open the borders, one that doesn't, one that wants us to be economically independent, and one that doesn't, all those things just add up to, well, it's just kind of like a no-brainer. And so, yes, we should celebrate good things because we have had a long time where we haven't been able to do that. So I think it's quite fine to do that. Obviously, you don't make our, the new candidate Trump into some sort of idol, some sort of deity or anything. But it's just the idea, if he's a guy, an imperfect man who's wanting to do some good things, then get behind it because that's the only choice that we have.
Yeah, you mentioned policies and platforms and procedures, not personalities, because every human being is flawed. So you couldn't vote for anybody then. Isn't this interesting? Do you kind of sense that some people were kind of up on their high horse or I can't vote because it's the lesser of two evils?
Right.
That's just such a warped perspective, in my opinion, because they're looking at, well, maybe I'm too righteous to vote because I can't lower myself to be involved in the affairs of the city and the country and politically and vote for anything that might help Christians influence culture for righteousness. It's just such a twisted thinking. Go ahead and share your thoughts on that, Jeff.
No, it really is. I think it's a combination of that, of really self-defeating ignorance and self-righteousness. And on the one side, it's kind of like, let's just say your kids are going to a school and there's one person that wants to cook them for lunch. They want to cook them just pizza every day. And somebody else wants to cook them a well-balanced meal with some meat and veggies and some starches and good meal. But that other chef, maybe they got a divorce or something, or maybe they're not a perfect person. And you're not voting for the good food because of the person that's going to be cooking it. And so in my mind, it's like, well, look, why don't you just let your kids eat good food instead of letting them eat pizza every day, regardless of what the person is? So again, I think Jack Hibbs did a good job of pointing this out, is that we're not voting for a pastor. We're not voting for someone to come in and live in our home with us. We're voting for a person to run a business called America. And we need to pick the best businessman that's going to have the best alignment with our values as Christians, which include righteousness, security, freedom, and being an ally to Israel. And those things all seem to line up.
Thank you. Friends, we're with Jeff Kinley. There's several websites you can go to. thekingiscoming.com is one. Of course, jeffkinley.com. We've got to take a brief pause. We'll be right back on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbingers Daily. World news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com. FreedomProject.com.
Hey friends, we're running another campaign. We do this twice a year to raise support for the next 6 months of production costs for Worldview Matters, and you've kept us going this far, and we thank you so much. So we would love to send you, well, first let me tell you how you can get this. For those able to contribute a one-time gift of $200 or a recurring gift of $25 a month, we'd love to send you this commemorative rose gold pen set branded with Worldview Matters. And for first-time donors, you also will get my favorite mug. Actually, don't put this in the dishwasher. We learned the hard way. But on one side, Worldview Matters. On the other side, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. Go to worldviewmatters.tv and make a tax-deductible gift today. Thank you guys for your prayers and financial support. So Jeff Kinley, has the left overplayed their hand? Did they push too hard? Did they push the, in my opinion, demonic ideologies, and you can go down the list, too far, and to the point the public pushed back in the election results? Because according to George Barna and the Cultural Research Center, Americans' faith and core values are what drove Trump to the landslide election victory. And I've got the Barna research, don't have enough time to go through it, but it's interesting. And that, by the way, is with a huge percentage of Christians not voting. So your take on that, please.
Yeah, I think what we see it on the East and the West Coast. You see the places where leftist, liberal leaning theology and philosophy rather is dominant. You see that's the areas in which those policies get voted in. But in mainstream America, for the most part, I think most Americans are pretty centrist. They may not be Christian, but they don't want a hairy man in a bathroom with their 9-year-old daughter, And so I think Satan really did overplay his hand. I think the left got very overconfident. They spent over $1 billion in about 100 days or so on a campaign, and everything just fell flat. Everything they tried fell flat. It just wasn't resonating with people. And I think on the other side of that too was the fact that, as you said, there were more positive values shared from the Republican platform. But with that too, people are looking at the cost of living, their state of mind at the time, the last 4 years, and they're like, we don't want any more of this. And so, as we see in politics, things ebb, things flow, things flip-flop. But I think we're picking up, I think, a lot of momentum right now. And I think people have seen that this radical, sinful, really, it's not just a leftist, it's a sinful agenda, really has no place in American society. And this is an opportunity for us as believers, I think, David, to really step into this open door and to use it as an opportunity for the gospel, not for politics, but for the gospel.
Yes. And I want to, on top of that, I want to just stress the fact that they're not going to stop. This didn't change the worldview of the left and those who are Marxists or believe in socialism or whatever, still supporting abortion, all these different things. It didn't change state laws. It didn't change their worldview, their anti-Christian or the anti-Semitism. We have to understand, we're thankful for the outcome of the election, but we've still got, first of all, a spiritual battle to fight, which is very real, and the enemy that's influencing, I want to say recruiting, because we're supposed to make disciples, right? Well, the enemy makes disciples too of the left. But with the darkness that has increased because of the radicalism, Jeff, I agree with you. I think there will be more opportunities to share the gospel because people are looking at the chaos and the nonsense around them. Like, men can be women now, or men can have babies. Can't believe some people believe that. And so there's some people who believe this life is all there is. They don't have the hope that we have, the hope in Christ, and they don't know the Bible. And there are people sincerely looking for answers. Go ahead and share more on that.
Yeah, there are. And the sad thing about our culture is what you just mentioned. I think Romans 1 verses 18 through 32 really do outline the progress of the digression rather, of our culture right now, and how once we reject God, God just turns the lights down and people are no longer able to understand true reality. And this is where this whole transgender delusion comes from. Once you reject God, you cannot understand what reality really is. But to kind of transition a little bit on that, pun intended, is that there's some good things, David, that are
Yes.
happening in our world and in our country. Things that I'm seeing right now that are giving me great encouragement and are really putting wind in the sails of my personal ministry. You mentioned Jack Hibbs. I just spent 4 days with Jack out in California. We did a Happening Now event on a Wednesday night.
Awesome.
2,500 people plus showed up. 3,000 were watching online. Over 370,000 have now watched the video, and they're there to learn how do we
Mm.
take now this time from the election and turn it into
Yes.
an opportunity. And then did a podcast with Jack. And then Friday and Saturday, we did the first ever that I'm aware of youth prophecy conference at Chino Hills. And David, there were 950 plus teenagers packing out that place. They were lined up 50 deep down every aisle asking
Wow.
questions. And for 2 days, they listened without a sound to Bible teaching. Jack spoke on the rapture, myself, Todd Hampson. We took them through a walkthrough of the chronology of the end times and how they can be light. They can light their lamp in these last days. So we're seeing all kinds of great things like that happening. And to me, it's encouraging because it tells me that, again, I think people are looking around saying, what is life? What's the meaning of my life? Where am I living? When am I living? And what can I do to make a difference in this world for Jesus?
Jeff, you had me at Youth Prophecy Conference. Let's
Yeah.
camp out there for another minute or
Yeah.
two, because if we could see this thing somehow spread or catch on across the country, because that's one demographic that we have not been able to maybe teach, maybe disciple, maybe educate in the biblical worldview. And in other words, just the opposite has been happening, the K through 12 and the university system and Hollywood and corporations have been teaching and discipling them. So youth prophecy, how can we get that to expand a little bit? How can we raise more interest about that?
Well, first of all, I can't believe you're asking that question because that's the very thing that we've been talking about. How do we do this again? How do we
Yeah.
do it in other places? Now, I was a youth pastor for 25 years. And one of the things, David, that I discovered about teenagers is that they can handle any truth in the Bible that adults can. And
Right.
many times on a better level because they don't sometimes don't have the baggage of history with them. They're just like kind of blank slates, but they ask perceptive questions. They want to know the truth and they appreciate people who speak directly to them, who don't beat around the bush. They're not trying to be cool in front of the kids. They just want the truth and they want to be loved. And so, yeah, we were hanging out with these 900 plus kids and they were just
Wow.
so excited to learn about this. So now we're brainstorming about how do we take this to other cities, to other groups that may come together and say, look, I want my kids to know what the Bible says about the last days and how they can be a light for Jesus. So yeah, we're in talks of how to do that and how to put that together other places.
Jeff, that just I think that just made it for me. I mean, that was one of the most encouraging things we talked about today. And I know we cover a lot of heavy stuff, the attacks on Christians, which they're increasing not just worldwide, but in America where we wouldn't expect it. We're out with our Constitution and the First Amendment and religious freedoms. But we just started the program talking about why Christian nationalism is offensive. But youth prophecy conference, same thing with you just trying to get youth engaged in just a biblical worldview. I think that's a great conversation we have to continue. And please keep me in the loop on anything, you're working on or you hear, because I think a lot of pastors would be interested in that. And I want to ask you a logical question. What advice would you give a pastor or youth pastor? Because so many youth pastors don't even have a biblical worldview and they're just entertaining kids. Instead of teaching them, as you said, they can handle it. They can take it, the tough topics. What advice would you give pastors to try to just don't sugarcoat the Bible when you're talking to youth? Go ahead.
I would say number one is that pastor, that youth pastor really needs to know what the Bible says. That's where it all begins. And so many are not willing to take the time or to do the effort or to do the Bible study to figure out what it says. Find trusted voices, trusted books, trusted resources that speak scholarly into these issues so that you're not getting into sensationalism or date setting or scaring kids, that kind of thing. There was no fear at this conference. It was all encouragement, all hope, and all truth. So know the scriptures. Then secondly, just start teaching it to them. That's what I did when I was a youth pastor. I said, all right, let's open the Bible. I gave them some studies. I wrote studies for them, and we just began to study the Bible. And what that did was it helped to make disciples. Instead of just keeping kids off the street or entertained, it actually let them know I can know God as a 14-year-old, and I can make a difference in my school as a 16-year-old. And so why wait? And, there have been studies that have been done. I did a book with Ken Ham where we figured out that we're losing kids by 8th grade, by age 13.
Yep.
And so we have to begin to equip kids more with biblical truth, apologetics, prophecy, history of the Bible, why we believe what we believe, so that when they get out into the world and they receive all those attacks out there, they can handle it out there because they've been equipped in the church and hopefully at home as well.
Jeff, when was that book you referred to with Ken Ham? Because I followed AIG.
Yeah.
I love that ministry, love him and his teachings and writing. When was that book?
Yeah, I believe it was 2017, if I'm not mistaken. It was called Ready to Return.
Okay.
Ready to Return. It's all about how do we get kids back into the church again.
There was another book called Already Gone.
Yeah, it's a part of a trilogy that Ken wrote, and I helped him write the last one.
So let's just say, all right, that was 2017. I'll never forget that the word of the year that year was post-truth, according to the Oxford Dictionary. So it's interesting now in 2024, going into 2025, at younger and younger ages, kids are being reached for what I would say, demonic purposes or the enemy instead of the truth and God. So we've got even more work to do now because they start doubting their faith earlier on from when they actually make the decision to not follow Christ anymore. So Jeff, just your final word of encouragement in the last minute here to our viewing audience, please.
I would say that with the election, with the times that we're living in, as dark as it is, the darker the night, the brighter the light. And for me personally, I think this is the most exciting time to be alive. And together, we've got to say, now is the time. We're in the 2-minute warning. There's no time to waste. We got to make sure we live strategic lives of purposeful urgency to give truth, love, and hope to this generation.
Amen, brother. Thank you for your perspective, for all your podcasts and all the work that you do, your many, many, many best-selling books. God bless you, brother. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. God bless.
All right, guys. Again, thank you so much for sharing the podcast. Sometimes they put a little disclaimer on some of our, depending on what platform. By the way, thank you for letting our Rumble channel grow because of you. We appreciate you guys who are following us there. God bless you. Thanks for your prayers. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.